Thank you for watching the Housing Oregon YouTube channel. Be sure to join our network and get involved in the work that we are doing. If you can, please like and subscribe. It helps us build this channel, which serves as a platform to communicate with our members. This video is part of our 2025 annual conference. We're looking for folks to be on the conference planning committee. Please email info@housingoregon.org.
Difficulties with our video, but we might be able to resolve it by the end. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This is Roots for Restoration, Beaverton's first year-round shelter. We are extremely proud of this project, and it's notable with so many people from many different organizations, city departments, and construction staff that came together to make this happen. The shelter is part of Washington County's continuum of care. Washington County has many other shelter sites that can accommodate couples, families, etc. This shelter in particular houses 60 individuals, both male and female identifying, and it's a low barrier shelter where pets are allowed. There are a number of emergency or e-beds that are used as needed in partnership with the Beaverton Police Department. And it's located at the intersection of Highway 217 and Beaverton-Oakdale Highway in a very commercial district. So it's Fred Meyer across the street and Goodwill next door, and it's right next to an on-ramp for Highway 217. Our speakers today, we have Sarah King here from the City of Beaverton. She is the Senior Project Development Project Manager. And without Sarah's influence on this project, working across the myriad of city departments and supporting and navigating through all the procurement processes, ensuring all the pieces came together, this project wouldn't have been as successful nor the process as it is. We have Andrea Wallace. She's another principal here at Inkfield Architecture, and I don't think I introduced myself, and I'm really sorry. This is Melinda Retallick. We'll get there. Also a principal at Inkfield Architecture. Andrea is our leader of all things design and beauty, and our most passionate advocate for inclusion. Her experience with trauma-informed design, her love of art, and commitment to knocking things out of the park were essential in the design and execution of this project. At the end down here, we have Chris Kushor. Chris Kushor from Open Door Housing Works. Open Door Housing Works won the RFP from the city and county to run the shelter in Beaverton. We're excited to have him here today because he'll be able to speak to how the organization actually uses the space and give some insight on how everything is working from the shelter guest perspective. We also have Andrew Craig here. We've worked with Andrew's team on so many projects, and we continue to ask him to join our team again and again because he cares about energy efficiency and resiliency as much as we do, and he knows how to communicate to the folks that do not have engineering degrees in ways that they can understand. Inkfield Architecture is a woman-owned architecture firm, and our mission is to redefine the potential of development and design to realize affordability, sustainability, and social equity in the built environment. Using design as a vehicle to deliver social, racial, and environmental justice, we bring people together to imagine and create communities and spaces that enable both people and the planet to thrive. At the core of how we build our practice is the belief that the most impactful and innovative solutions emerge from a collective collaboration with our consultants, clients, contractors, and all the stakeholders. For the entire project team, and we spoke about this so many times, the general sense of teamwork, collaboration, and joy of creating something truly special for the city of Beaverton and all the guests that would inhabit this space was profound. This was in large part due to the way the city pursued the project, from hiring an owner's rep to acquisition to the design and CMGC RFP process, and the advisory committee of shelter operators that were essential in the pre-construction process. Sarah will begin our presentation by describing the city's early acquisition process and the funding sources. And this is a list of all the team, and we'll put that up at the end as well.
All right, yes, it's on. All right, good morning. Thanks, Mel. As Mel mentioned, this is city's first year-round shelter. Prior to this shelter being constructed, the City of Beaverton had what we called a seasonal shelter. It was for basically cold winter months. And we knew we needed more. Like everywhere, Washington County and the City of Beaverton does have a homeless population that is growing, and the humanitarian thing that our city council recognizes that we really needed a shelter that could serve this population year round. But not just any shelter, we wanted a shelter that would be in conformance with best practices. It would be trauma informed, it would be low barriers, Mel mentioned, we wanted it to align with our other adopted plans, such as our climate action plan. We started out, before we even looked at sites, adopting siting criteria. It was really interesting, an important thing. The City of Beaverton made the decision to not engage the public prior to purchasing a site. And I'll get into that in a minute. But what that meant was that the City of Beaverton, before we even started looking at shelter sites for our shelter, the City Council adopted shelter siting criteria based on best practices. And these are the usual things that you're probably familiar with. Siting a shelter that was on and accessible by transit. That was number one. Siting a shelter in an area that was not isolated, right? So don't put it out in the middle of an industrial area where folks just don't have access to anything. We wanted it in a standalone building, right? We didn't want to purchase something with multiple tenants because we knew that could be potentially problematic. We wanted it near services. So those kinds of, and we wanted a site in a location that if it was not ADA accessible, could easily be ADA accessible without great cost. So those are the type of siting criteria that we had. We, of course, did this in partnership with Washington County. In our arrangement, or this is a typical arrangement in Washington County, the city purchased, improved, and owns the shelter building. We own it, it's our building. However, we do not operate it. The county has a lease with the city, and the county provides intake services and operates the shelter through a contracted provider, Open Door. Chris is here representing Open Door. The county contributed state allocated housing and medical supportive housing services, SHS bond, funds for construction. The county pays for operations with SHS funding, and importantly, because when we started this design process, we did not have an operator on board, and we knew we would not have an operator on board during the whole design process. Instead, the city and the county together put together an advisory committee made up of service providers that could help inform us as we went through the design process. The county paid for most of that advisory committee. The city also kicked in and paid for a couple additional participants to sit in on that advisory committee, and that was a really valuable group to help us make informed decisions about design. A couple of other things that became apparent as we moved through the process goal-wise. One, because the city was owning this building, and because this building was going to be maintained with public funding, we wanted to make sure, and we didn't want to cause maintenance problems down the road. We really emphasized durability. We really wanted this to be a building that could stand the test of time, and we were willing to put the money in up front to make a durable building that would hopefully cost less to maintain in subsequent years. The other thing I wanted to mention is because this is a city-owned property and the city actually contracted for the tenant improvements, it made this project fall under the city's percent for art requirement. And that was great because we got to have a fund of money for art for the project. So we spent that money, and we'll talk, I think others will talk about that. We spent that money on some murals, but also we spent that money on a artist in residency program, which was the first for the city, for us to actually use percent for art money for an artist in residence. Speaking about funding, we, like all these kinds of projects, there were a lot of sources of money. The whole total for acquisition and renovation was $14 million. Just acquiring the property alone was over $3 million. Property after post-COVID in Washington County and in the city of Beaverton was extremely hard to find. It was very expensive. Everyone wanted to be out in the suburbs. So we were really fortunate to find this site. We had money from everywhere, as you can see up there. And we also use incentive programs from Energy Trust of Oregon and from Business Oregon to help with both design work, pre-design, design, and construction work. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, talking about the site, Mel talked a little bit about the site. We are on the Beaverton-Hillsdale Highway. You can see the site is, I think, surrounded in blue. Yeah, is it red? I'm sorry, blue. I've got mine. It's here. It's on black and white. So as you can see, Beaverton-Hillsdale Highway, we've got frequent transit on Beaverton-Hillsdale Highway. That bus line connects to the Beaverton Transit Center. Chris may talk about this, but we were in a pretty transit-rich environment, which was great. We were in the middle of a commercial area, so we didn't have to deal with residential neighbors. We did have commercial neighbors who were concerned. We worked through that. But, we're near services. We're by a gas station. We're by Fred Meyer. We're close to we're a transit right away from Virginia Garcia Clinic. We've got Kaiser down the road. We've got other social services other services nearby. So it's a really, we were really fortunate to find this site, as expensive as it was. As I said, I want to talk a little bit about not engaging the community beforehand. This was hard for our city council to get behind, this idea that we would not ask the community about where we should site this, but everyone we talked with said there's no upside to that. You're just going to make people mad and nobody wants this. So go do your acquisition, find your site, secure it, get it under contract, actually sell, wait till you close so that no one can pull out of any deal, and then go talk to the public. And that's what we did. And I think that worked fine. Okay, actually, it really did. I mean, that's not to say some people weren't mad, because some people were, but we worked through that. Okay, next slide. Yep. Yeah, okay, just very briefly, this is what it looked like beforehand. It had 2 tenants in it. Another important thing when we found our property, we needed a standalone building. We also needed to look at one that didn't have long-term tenants in it, because we didn't want to have to buy out leases. That gets expensive. We were really fortunate to find this building with a mattress store that was vacating just about the time we were closing on the property, and a dentist who was on a month-to-month lease. So very fortunate. You can see the goodwill there on one side and the freeway on the other. I would say, first to say, it's not ideal being next to a freeway, but again, real estate was extremely tight. We felt very fortunate to find this site, and we were, it's not perfect, but pretty darn close to what we were looking for. And then we had this backyard. And I think that others will talk about what we did to this backyard. It turned into a beautiful private open space. So we were looking for a building that afforded us an opportunity to have outdoor space, and this building did. I think I'm done.
Andrea, do you want to speak to the collaboration process?
That doesn't feel so good. I also can talk loud.
All right, there we go. So, as Sarah already mentioned, there was a lot of pieces that went into this before we got started, and I would say there's a couple key parts to success that we felt were important to highlight. So one was that actually, as we were getting on board, the City of Beaverton had already put together a technical advisory committee, and that included several nonprofit organizations that were already boots on the ground working either in shelter, running shelters, or were really intimately knowledgeable around successful practices when it comes to sheltering folks that are experiencing houselessness. And the other thing that we feel was a huge piece of that was prioritizing the guest experience. Every discussion we had really was about what is it going to be like to be a guest here, and from the moment you walk in the door
to the moment you see your bed for the first time. You know, like what is that experience going to feel like, especially with folks that are experiencing such high levels of trauma. We actually, I'll do a little side part here, we had a chance to tour as part of our collaborative design team, PATH did a village home shelter. And I remember Brandy Tuck saying, you know, someone experiencing houselessness really can only absorb like every 7th word that you tell them. And you know, they're in such a state of fight or flight and survival mode that they, you know, we're expecting folks to be able to just walk in and fill out an application and get into shelter, and that is absolutely not how this works. And many of you probably are already familiar with that. But you know, for us, I don't have lived experience with shelter, and I haven't worked in a shelter. So hearing some of what the insight of our technical advisory committee gave us was a way for us to really be able to do our job as designers and put all the pieces together. So I think, you know, we wouldn't have as successful of a project here without that entire team effort. And then also, as you already mentioned, the CMGC, the kind of design team collaboration with our contractor, PNC Construction, was absolutely fabulous. Our entire consultant team was fabulous. But you know, the relationship we had with PNC and seeing how much they cared about the project and they poured as much heart into it to make sure it was as successful as it was really important. So true shout out to them. The next slide is just kind of offering up some of the folks that were included. So we had a lot of city staff that were included as well. Megan Cohen was amazing. Travis Taylor with our facilities, with City of Beaverton's facilities. You know, having the folks from the City of Beaverton that are both working within the realm of sheltering and houselessness and housing, all the way to the facilities folks being able to provide us true insight on long-term management of this building. You know, we really couldn't have done it without this whole team. And then, as I mentioned, we had this advisory committee with folks from Central City Concern, Greater Good Northwest, NARA, Open Door, and then also Jesse Adams from Washington County. And then we did have a chance to tour several shelters and really talk about what was successful at them, what maybe they would do differently, and how any of those different spaces programmatically might want to exist in the shelter that we were doing in Beaverton, but also kind of what worked and what didn't work when it came to kind of designing the space. So Inkville led the team through a series of goal setting workshops, and that started with really just identifying, the city had in the RFP process had identified a couple of key pieces that they wanted the shelter to have and some key goals. And so we really wanted to make sure we understood that. Like, what did success look like from the City of Beaverton's perspective? What does it mean to like provide a shelter that's going to offer hope? And so with the entire advisory team, as well as city staff, and you're seeing half of Francesca there, she was the owner's representative on the project. We did a lot of kind of collaborative goal setting and programming workshops. You can go to the next slide. And then we were able to like synthesize all this information that we distilled from the group and bring that down into like, okay, what does collaboration mean? What does empowerment mean? What does safety mean in shelter? And you know, it's understanding when, you know, when there might be an altercation, there might be high feelings, there might be high anxiety, making sure that every space has a secondary exit. So that way somebody can't get trapped in a space with an altercation. You know, that is something that we can do to bring safety to the space, and it's something that we maybe wouldn't have totally understood when we just started. You know, oh, well, you'll do this little small meeting room. Well, that small meeting room could be a space that becomes very unsafe very quickly, so we wanted to make sure that through the entire process, we were thinking about what all of these different pieces meant. And then we kind of, again, distilled down, we did surveys, we did collaborative workshops, we asked the questions, we asked hard questions, we asked a lot of questions, and thankfully, I think one of the other things that was a key to the success of the collaborative process was that the city actually paid those nonprofits to participate. So they had, you know, not just out of the goodness of their heart, they had like a true reason, like they were hired to provide this feedback, and it was amazing. You know, they took the time to fill out the surveys, and we asked questions like, if you were designing this shelter, what is a space you absolutely would not include that often is put into shelter, or what is a space that you feel like is often overlooked? So we had a chance to really understand that. And we had some really big conversations around beds. A lot of the shelters that we toured with maybe the exception of 2 of them, were kind of large sleeping rooms with bunk bed configurations. And we heard from multiple service providers that 80% of conflicts in shelters happen around bunk beds. A lot of folks don't want to sleep in a bunk bed. They don't want to sleep above or below somebody. And there's also a lot of folks that experience mobility issues. You know, they may have health issues that are related to their feet, their legs, and climbing up in a bunk bed, especially a metal bunk bed, is really not something that's feasible. So we actually see a lot of vacant beds in our shelters locally that are top bunks. And so we had some bigger conversations around, you know, what is, if what is going to define our success here is getting folks into housing, then maybe even fewer folks in a shelter that get better care and feel more comfortable and more safe can more thoroughly transition out of shelter and into housing is better than just providing more beds. And so I think that was an important piece that, you know, I as an architect, sometimes you're beholden to what your client wants. And we were like, man, we really think we shouldn't do bunk beds. And Sarah and the Beaverton team was like, you're absolutely right. They heard the same thing we heard, they listened, and that was fantastic to really feel like we were all on the same page all the way through. So we did a bunch of bed studies. We figured out how many square feet per bed with storage space and configurations, and none of these went forward. We actually did individual sleeping, kind of what we call pods. So that was kind of cool. We also did a big like collaborative design session where they actually rented out a large room, probably a bit bigger than this, at the library in Beaverton. And we had folks from the technical advisory team, we had our construction folks, we had an expanded group from the city. We also had folks with lived experience. We had our contractors there. We had all of our consultants there. And we sat down, we kind of printed out a large sheet of what the building plan was and gave everybody these puzzle pieces of all the different spaces that we had determined in our programming requirements, and had everybody kind of come up with different designs. So you can kind of see how they laid out the puzzle pieces there. And each team had a chance to kind of identify what their design was based around, why they did what they did, what their thought process was, and we kind of presented each of the design options to the group as a whole. And then we took that back to our office. We did another internal charrette as well, and then we kind of took that within our office and figured out, okay, what's the kind of best of each of these ideas and mash it together. So you'll see on the for me, it's my top left. It's probably top left for you. I'm trying to do that in my head. There's this kind of swirling piece in the middle. That was like one of the concepts, was to have this like piece that comes in as a focal point. Maybe there's a tree in this space. Maybe we connect that with the outdoor space. And you're gonna see that tree made it through the design. You're gonna see, one of the designs here, they tucked all the beds kind of to one side. And at first we were thinking maybe we divide that up, male and female, but actually having the ability to have it all kind of on one side and connected to the hygiene area and the laundry area, and have it much more kind of cohesive, quiet side of the building, and then a more public, active side of the building, was something that we carried all the way through. So you're seeing kind of different pieces here that actually elements of each one of those made it into the final design. And as you can see, we kind of broke down each of them. We actually put them into our modeling and broke down each of them and drew them all up. And then the final plan is the kind of the meshing of all these ideas, which is really kind of fun and cool to see it come all the way through. So we have also, I will speak to a little bit about the regenerative design goals, and we're going to get into the energy side of this kind of a little bit towards the end of the presentation. But it was also really important, the city has some robust goals around energy not compliance, but energy use, I guess, as well as just long-term management of their buildings. And so the fact that we were able to do an adaptive reuse, like that's an incredible reuse of a building that was otherwise a commercial space. And then we obviously wanted to bring in a lot of that trauma-informed design. And at Inkville, we also kind of bring in inclusion and biophilia into our trauma-informed design practice, because it's such a key piece of that kind of health and healing and making sure that everybody feels welcome. And then we also obviously want to really prioritize and optimize guest health and wellness. And I'll speak just briefly, I won't get into all of the tenets of trauma-informed design, But as I mentioned, we kind of, there's typically like 5 petals to the trauma-informed design. We add the other 2, the kind of inclusion and biophilia there on the right. But ultimately, understanding that folks that are experiencing houselessness are coming with a significant amount of trauma, and no person's story is the same. No person's experience is the same. No person experiencing houselessness ended up in houselessness the same, nor do they have the same feelings coming out of that and into shelter. And so making sure that we can fit a variety of needs and a variety of trauma in a responsive way that still feels safe. You know, like some folks maybe need a space where they can kind of have some restfulness and some quiet space, maybe some privacy, but sometimes those quiet, private spaces are less safe than spaces where you've got a full line of sight and you can see everything, but who wants to be in a room that like has just big wide open and you're exposed on all sides, right? So creating spaces, you're gonna see as we get into some of the images of the finished shelter, creating pockets where you have a lot of different types of seating, a lot of different areas, both small and large, and defining those with walls that are maybe not full height, bringing the wall heights down, so when you're sitting down, you have your back up against the wall, someone's like not right behind you, but that I can still stand up and I can kind of see out, and you still get a lot of those lines of sight, and using things like screens, like some wood screen elements to bring in a biophilic piece, a nice natural wood texture, but still can see through it. So it gives you a little bit more of that privacy, a little bit more of that spatial definition, but that you can also see through it. So there's quite a few pieces. I've mentioned a few of them that went into our trauma-informed design practice, and are reflected in the space. So we'll show you some cool shots here in just a minute. So when we were talking about some of the interior design elements, we really wanted to create a space that really is almost like a ripple effect, right? Somebody that comes in here can feel safe, they can talk about it with their friends can maybe want to come into shelter as well. It can kind of help draw people in, and it also helps them go back out into the community stronger, safer, healthier. And so that was kind of the inspiration behind what we were doing on the interior side. But also we heard another comment from Brandy, actually, was another one, is that surprisingly circles are a shape that remind us of things of our childhood, like bubblegum and lollipops and bubbles. And so we brought a lot of circles into the space. We kind of took that and we're like, you know what, you're right, like let's do this. So we brought in a lot of round shapes, and I think it works. Chris will talk to that here in just a minute. But you're gonna see some like rippling baffles on the ceiling that both work for an acoustical standpoint as well as a design element in the space. And we really wanted to kind of create this like Zen spa-like feeling when you're in the space. So this is kind of some of the mood board concepts that we brought to the city as far as how we wanted to kind of inspire and inform the space. And then our palette of materials and kind of textures and look and feel. So we did a trauma-informed design color palette, which is often a little bit more on the blue and the green tones, definitely inspired by nature, but it tends to avoid things like dark red, dark orange, things that sometimes feel more excitable, especially in a space if all the walls are that color. So we did bring in some pops of yellow and some brighter colors in our murals. But they were done in a way that just really kind of tie it all together in a beautiful space. So these were some of the early renderings, and I only show these because I want you to see like the after actually came pretty darn close to what we rendered. So it's kind of cool to see how it actually came to life. So we can kind of just fly through these pretty quickly. These were the kind of interior design renderings where we did have a tree kind of in the space. We opened up a skylight to bring in a lot of natural light over that tree. And then we also added quite a few solar tubes, so I'll show you in one of the images where some of those exist, but it actually allows a lot of daylight to come in deep in this big, otherwise kind of boxy building where you aren't getting any natural daylight in there. We wanted to make sure that there was a lot of access to daylight and views outside, but still maintaining privacy. So these are just kind of some of the renderings. And then the next slide is going to show you, the next slide is going to talk about how these design elements, like I was discussing, tie together to all inform the trauma-informed design.
I'd like to pause, just hand the mic to Chris, so he can speak a little bit to the guest experience.
Yeah, I was going to do that as we go through the
Yeah,
slides, the next slides.
Okay, the next set of slides?
Yeah, the next slides are the
Okay.
So,
Okay, go ahead.
go.
Yeah, so as a person with lived experience and the opportunity to not only manage this shelter, but my experience with our other shelter at the Hillsborough Congregate is definitely not what we walked into the first day of taking on this project. Not what we were expecting. It definitely revitalized all staff as far as, wow, there was a lot of intent behind it, not only for the participants, but the staff as well. Having, private space for staff to come off of very heightened experiences was great. And I mean, first I want to touch on that location piece that we talked about. It's public. It's a very public, like you said, commercial area, but it is positioned in a unique spot where we're access to mass transit. The local resources just in that Griffin Park area have been amazing thus far. Access to grocery store, which is not one of the hardest things for a lot of places to be in position. But what we found is that location has also provided a unique opportunity for folks within the shelter to obtain employment much easier. Transportation is a huge cost, as we all know. So having it within walking distance has definitely had an effect within the population we've served so far. And then I really want them to see the space, but the intentional.
They're looking at the front door.
Yeah, so this is the actual outcome of the building. So it looks better than the renderings, I think. Like I said, as a person with lived experience, I was not one that ever enjoyed shelter. I refused to go to shelters. I had a negative outlook, and then somehow I ended up working at a shelter. But you can see from this, you walk in the door and it's very intentional. This space was made for people. It was not a space of opportunity like, we have this random building somewhere, let's just put bunk beds. That intent was, I don't know if it was intended to be a warm welcome to a community that was otherwise shunned, but it definitely felt that way. And also met the needs of the community as far as every little detail. Like you said, you spoke on the circles, and it wasn't really told to us as providers, but once we had folks come in with severe mental health, they were talking about the circles. And it wasn't until that point where they're like, they would walk circles a lot of the times, and it made them feel better and that comfortability for them. As people who have been unsheltered, living outdoors, the boxiness of maybe institutions, anything like that we've experienced was an immediate trigger to positivity within the environment. So, yeah, we'll pass it back to you to go through these slides.
Yeah, so we're going to pass it back and forth here. Chris and I are going to talk about the space together. So the front door, one thing that we wanted to do is we didn't want to highlight hey, I'm a shelter, I'm a shelter, I'm a shelter. Because the other thing that's really important to note here is that in order to get into this shelter, you actually have to go through an application process with the county and you get assigned to this shelter. So it's not a walk-in or a walk-up. It is a low, hopefully no barrier. There is no such thing as no barrier, but low barrier shelter. But again, you have to kind of get assigned to this space. So we wanted it to be playful. We wanted it to have some color, but we also didn't want to flag it as this big, huge sign I'm a houseless shelter. It's meant to be kind of nondescript. And then you're seeing a little bit of paint of the color that splashes across the windows. We actually utilize window films. If we go to the next slide. Actually, it's me. This is the second one. Sorry. This is the entry. When you first walk in, this is what you see. You kind of experience those circles. The reception area is circular with those ripple baffles. And I had an opportunity to be part of the interview panel and selection committee for the muralist. And Damon is an incredible artist that actually also has lived experience with houselessness in Beaverton. And hearing his story and selecting him as the artist was just such a cool experience. And to see what he brought, I could have never envisioned the art for this space that ended up being put there. And it is so telling of who he is and his story and how it connects with everybody there. So this is the mural on the entry that he really took our design and just made it so much better with the art, which is really cool. One of the things that we heard in one of the surveys is not to do a lot of concrete, but unfortunately it is one of the cheapest, most durable materials for a flooring, especially when you already have a concrete slab in an existing building. So we really wanted everything else to really offset that warmth. We didn't want it to feel institutional. We wanted you to walk in and feel like you got a hug. And so allow the wood tones to come in, the natural elements, and that art piece, and those circles, and the kind of dancing orbs. When you see the building from the exterior at night, you actually see those globes light up on the outside with the color of the windows, and it's really beautiful. It's kind of a cool experience. So the next slide kind of shows that privacy film and making sure that the folks experienced privacy but still had access to light and nature. They could see the top part of it is clear, but the bottom part of it is frosted with color. So they get that experience of privacy inside the space, but that doesn't mean that they're closed off or disconnected from the outside. So that was definitely intentional. We have gotten some feedback on our soft seating. Maybe it shouldn't be quite so soft. But we wanted to make sure that people had a landing pad or a landing space that we wanted to make sure that there wasn't just all hard seating everywhere. We didn't want it to feel institutional. It's okay if, we have to steam clean the chairs. We wanted people to feel like they could sit down and have a soft landing spot. And you're seeing a door on the lobby space. There's doors to the left that's going to the coordinated care space. So there were some dollars that were earmarked for coordinated care, and it does have a clinic space and kind of a doctor's office and a small lobby. It's also connected to the exterior, so folks can come in and get the care that they need. Did you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, so that coordinated care space has provided, an opportunity for us to bring other providers in. We're currently working with Virginia Garcia. We've got a lot more coming on as far as everything we can think of. There's not a resource that we can't provide through this space. And then that door would allow us to open it up for not just participants within the shelter. We have not done that yet, but it has the possibility where we could open up to a greater community than just the people that we serve. So again, the intent behind even every doorway was definitely there by Inkville.
So we'll talk about some of the interior spaces. This is one of the intake rooms. And before we had the muralists totally signed up, one of the things that we tend to do at Inkville is be like, well, the painters can do this. This isn't that hard or that expensive. And the painter's like, are you kidding me? Like, you want me to paint swoops on the wall? You're gonna have to come and draw that. So we did. We came and drew the swoops on the wall, and we added like that same kind of swooping vinyl graphic that you saw on the exterior is brought into this space with a little pop of sunshine and that pop of yellow. And some of the hard seating that we provided does bring in a lot more color to the space. And in some of the spaces, the intake rooms, and you're going to see the sensory refuge space here in just a second, we really wanted to kind of pay attention to some acoustics. A lot of times those are hard conversations being had. People are already feeling super vulnerable. They maybe don't want to feel like everybody can hear that conversation. So in some of those spaces, we paid a lot higher attention to some of the acoustical privacy. When we talk about safety, sometimes acoustical privacy can be a negative. You want to be able to hear if there's an altercation going on. So in spaces like our sleeping rooms, the walls don't actually go up to the ceiling because we wanted acoustical transparency. We wanted to know if there was something happening in there, the staff can go and identify it. But with spaces like this, where you're going to be meeting with somebody and having some hard conversations or some private conversations, we really wanted to focus on acoustics. So you're seeing some cork flooring that was brought into those spaces. And then in the sensory refuge space that you'll see here in a second has some additional kind of wood feature wall. We had pretty good attention to detail around how to work through both showering, toilets, sinks. Never feels good to have to get ready in a commercial bathroom, so we wanted to make sure people had like a vanity or a space that they don't have to be in the bathroom to be able to do their hair or look in the mirror, kind of check out their appearance or get ready for the day. We wanted that to be both able to be sitting and standing, and this kind of vanity table also is meant to serve as a landing space because a lot of folks experiencing houselessness don't feel comfortable leaving their belongings unattended. And so as they're doing their laundry, they don't want to leave their laundry in a room where somebody could come and steal something out of it. So we actually provided like a landing zone here. You can sit here and talk to somebody, you can play some cards, you can fold your laundry or organize your belongings, but it's really meant to be kind of like a multi-use space here that kind of connects to the shower rooms, all of which are ADA compliant, and Crystal speaks to the importance of that as well. We also have a bed bug chamber right off of this space for folks coming in case we needed to deal with bed bugs. It's like a high heat, fully insulated room that allows us to treat that. And then we also have the sleeping rooms are off of this. So this is the image that I was going to say is you're also seeing the solar tubes. So the square lens that you're seeing there is actually a skylight, a solar tube that's bringing a lot of daylight in, and it was pretty incredible during construction to come in when the electricity wasn't even turned on and you could see it. Like they didn't even need like construction lights like deep in the space because of how much daylight was coming in with the solar tubes. So I'll let you speak to the kind of shower rooms and bathrooms.
Yeah, with all of these, I mean, the platform that granted there, you see, oh, there your bathroom slide. Oh, okay. It's kind of turned into a puzzle space, to be quite honest now. But I wish you could see the full wraparound. But yeah, you've got one dorm section off to the left there, and then another bigger dorm off to the right. So when you talk about everything being connected, it's localized. People have access to those, and with each one being ADA, it allows more versatility as far as people going in. We don't have to be like, oh, you have to use this one because it's ADA. Yeah, things like that is provided, equal opportunity in all the space. And then right from behind this space, you'll see the laundry facilities. So everything that you need in one centralized area, and just kind of welcoming. It doesn't say you have to go through hallways. The vanity has been a highlight for all the women in the shelter, for sure. And then going into the bathrooms, we as operators, we allow people to identify however they see fit. So, it was these bathrooms, there's not urinals, you'll see each one is a stall. So again, the flexibility of the space has proved very accommodating. And on the showers, difficult for staff to clean, but all our participants love it. Yeah, I'll pass it back.
Okay, and then now we're going to get into the sleeping rooms, the dormitories. So we had part of it was a discussion with the county. They have kind of a continuum of housing and a continuum of shelter that this shelter kind of falls within. So the shelter is not meant to be for folks that are maybe have partners or have families or young children. This is mainly single adults and either male identifying or female identifying. When we first were working through the design of the shelter, and probably all the way through construction and well into it being operational, it was 80% male and 20% female identifying was the target for the shelter. We're seeing those numbers change, and they're having to kind of refigure how safety and everything can work as more female identifying folks are showing up to the shelter. But what you're seeing here is that every guest has a private sleeping area. So they have a bed that's low to the ground and easy to get in and out of. There is a small locking locker that actually functions as a nightstand next to their bed, and then a smaller locking locker for more of their belongings. They can also put belongings below their bed. And then there's a reading light as well as an outlet with an assortment of plugs that folks can charge devices and things on. So it's really meant to be a space that they can call their own. They can have a sense of autonomy over their space. And we provided laminate. I didn't mention that at the beginning. So a lot of the blue swooping that you're seeing on the walls and here along the sleeping room, in order to get a little bit increased durability, drywall tends to ding really easily. So we actually provided a laminate wainscoting. And so we brought that in kind of in playful shapes and colors. And the acoustic panels tie to the colors as a wayfinding device. You guys probably don't even, I don't know if we ever told you that. But essentially, if you look up into the dormitory space, the different circles those colors tie to the sleeping pods. So if you were looking, like if you know that your sleeping pod or your room is in the blue space, you can kind of see the colors and know where your bed is within the space overall. So everything kind of ties together colorly from a color perspective. And then each of the front doors by the sleeping pod has a whiteboard laminate where people can actually write welcome signs. They can write notes to each other. They can write notes about themselves and kind of own it as a front door, if you will, to their space. And then one of the trickier parts was to fit all of these beds and all of these walls and still have 2 means of egress out of every part of the space. So you can't necessarily egress out of your sleeping room, but there are no dead-end corridors. Everything loops around. It feels a little bit maze-ish sometimes because we were trying to make sure that everybody had a secondary way out, that somebody couldn't get kind of pinned into a corner. But it was all intentional to make sure that we were providing as much safety as we could in that space.
Yeah, definitely one of the highlights, and we've seen a very high success rate, and from all the other providers within Washington County, consistent referrals from other shelters. They're all trying to get in at the Beaverton. But what we've seen is these spaces has been so versatile that a lot of the older population or people with disabilities or mobility issues are the ones that are being kind of pushed to this space, since like we said, every room is accessible. There's no dead-end hallways, and from a participant's view, like they have that locking cabinet, no bunk bed, and from staff view, that whiteboard has been great. We're leaving notes, things, positives, goals that have been met, appointment reminders. So, we didn't realize that at the beginning, so it worked out really well. And the safety and security of that, just having, like you said, this trying to keep your property, having those locked spaces so that even though you're in a congregate setting, you have a sense of security that your belongings will be there when you return. It's been great.
Awesome. And then one of the other spaces that was unique to this project for us was a sensory refuge space, a space where you can kind of de-escalate and calm down. And for a lot of people, that's different. That might feel or look different. And so we wanted to kind of create a little bit of a blank canvas and allow the service provider to really kind of fill this space how they felt would best serve the population that they're serving. But we also wanted it to feel calming, and we wanted it to feel tactile. So one of the first things you want to do when you walk in this space is go touch that wood wall. And you can go touch that wood wall. It feels cool. It's meant to be touched. That's something that we'll continue to utilize actually in our practice as designers, because it does create just such a kind of that tactile approach. There's something it does to your brain chemistry to just walk up and touch it, and like you can focus on that. We provided a little bit different approach on the lighting, so it can be a little bit softer and dimmable, and it does a little bit more wall washing versus the kind of harsher fluorescent broader lighting. And then again, you're seeing that cork floor, so bringing in that soft surface and a higher level of acoustics all around, like walls, ceilings, and floor of this space. So if somebody needs to go in there and just kind of shout, you might hear it outside the room, but it should be pretty muffled. We also needed to provide enough transparency into that space. So there's still 2 doors, and there's a relight window so people can kind of see into the space and know what's going on in there, which are also weak points when it comes to acoustics. So again, it's not totally it's not a soundproof booth, but it's meant to be, like next best on that.
So when we initially opened, this was the only space that didn't require signing in or out. To track services, showers, and all that, we have them signed in and out. But this was, you can just use it at your own leisure, and it's gotten so popular that we have to have a sign in and sign out sheet. We know congregate living can be difficult, so just to provide a space that says, here, this is for you. And we've kind of let them kind of tailor it to their needs. They just want comfy chairs and some headphones. Like a lot of the time, just to get away from everybody is what we're seeing it utilized for. So.
All right, and then the showstopper of the space, you see when you walk in the door, it's right behind the reception area. You're seeing those circles, those ripples, they kind of lead you to the center of the space, which has our beautiful tree, which I wish I had more updated photos because I hear it's grown up substantially. I think when I was there, closer to when it was opening in the winter, it was also decorated, I think, or had some cards or something on it, maybe for Christmas time and around it, which was fantastic. It's fun to see how that really just comes to life. And then there's a variety of seating around it. So we have kind of a tall area that's like a workstation, like you can kind of sit there and eat your lunch or work on a laptop or sit on your phone, whatever you want to do kind of at the table. There's also a lower bench area. And then you're seeing spur off of that some smaller little breakout lounge spaces. So there's like a little reading corner next to that sensory refuge space. You're seeing some pops of yellow pillows in the background there. And then off to the left, there's a smaller area where it's kind of connected to the dining room. It has the dining room tables and chairs, but it's a little bit smaller version of that. So if somebody didn't feel great in the overall dining room and they wanted a little bit more private place to go sit and eat their lunch or dinner, they could. And then there's, you tuck behind the tree in this view, you can't see it, but there's another little like soft lounge space. So all of those are kind of swooping walls come down to short height. So you can see over them, you get the lines of sight all the way through the space, but it does provide a variety of seating and ways for people to kind of land.
Yeah, and from a provider standpoint, where this angle, this picture is from, this would be the front desk. So we're looking back and we can see, like you said, all the way through the back. Has helped staff. You know, if you're working the front desk, you can see out almost completely to the backyard. Has provided us to be able to be flexible with our staffing structure. And, you know, not only for problems where there might be altercations or anything like that, but if there's, you know, communication can be had throughout the whole space, and those low walls keep it private, but open for staffing to observe.
Okay, and I'm running out of time because I talk too much, so we're gonna flip through a couple of these fairly quickly. Mel's just gonna kind of flip through the soft seating area off of that tree, and then the dining room space that you're seeing. And then the next slide is looking back towards the kitchen. I'll let Chris speak to the kitchen piece because it is pretty important, and then we're going to go ahead and jump outside and start talking about solar panels and ETO and energy. So I'll let Chris speak to the kitchen piece here, and then we'll move on. And I'm happy to share any images of the space outside of this.
Yeah, and one of the best things about working with Inkbuilt is when they don't get upset when I tell them how they can improve next time. So, and we continue to work together in our access center. So it was initially set up for a warming space, but it's been great. Again, the versatility of every space, you know, what their intentions were from design, you know, us as providers have been able to adapt that to the needs of the population, whether it comes from the dorms being split, you know, 80-20, and now it being, you know, 40-60. So just the versatility of the space. You can see there's a serving area here, but then there's also the bar that rolls up on this side near the coffee or the microwaves. Serving 60 individuals 3 meals a day in such a tiny space, but it also doesn't feel that way when you're serving. My background being in culinary, I was pretty impressed with the kitchen. Minor, except for a few details. But yeah, it's definitely... Yeah, so definitely the dishwashing situation. We got a little bar dishwasher one at a time, so we're going to improve on that in the future. And then the stove was a little too controlled by an app and things like that. And staff trying to figure that out was a little too. But ultimately, the spaces worked great. Easy to clean, and that's one thing that we didn't touch about. All these spaces have been so easy for the operator to clean and maintain sanitation standards. That alone is great for us.
Yeah, I'll speak to that just a little bit. That's one of the key takeaways, I would say, if you're going to do a shelter yourself, is actually making sure we had an opportunity, as I mentioned, to talk to our advisory committee about the kitchen. There was a lot of conversation around the kitchen, a lot. And whether an operator is going to need just a warming kitchen, they're going to bring meals in, versus doing everything on disposables, versus actually doing full meal prep. Those are very different kitchen types with very different kitchen equipment needs. And so it was decided that this was going to be a warming kitchen and that they were going to bring pre-made meals in on basically disposables. So that was the equipment that we provided. That is not how Open Door operates, which is fantastic. They actually make meals. So we're actually, as part of their access center, going to be providing them with a commissary type kitchen that they can make meals at their access center and then provide those throughout the community. But, you know, that's a very different kitchen than what was provided at this shelter. So I think in hindsight, looking back, if we would have left it a little bit more of like waited to make some of the decisions on the kitchen until the operator was determined, that might have gone a little bit more smoothly because we could have provided exact equipment to what their needs are. But that just happened to be the way that the timing worked out with this entire process. You're seeing some wood here. Again, this is all laminate, so it's easily cleanable. So I don't want to like give any like, this isn't real wood down here, but we wanted to make sure it still felt biophilic and it felt natural. Okay, I'm gonna hand it over to Andrew here. We're gonna talk a little bit about we'll talk about the outdoor space. The outdoor space is a critical space, and you're seeing some of the circles that come back into the back space. But one of the cool features is we actually have a covered seating area. And that covered seating area has a screen that separates between a smoking section and a non-smoking section. and it is where our solar panels are.
Great, thanks. Yeah, let's go. Get a nice review of the upper space. And then we have a summary of just some of the great efficiency measures that we're able to incorporate on this project. So we have a solar array on the roof, 20 kilowatt, provides over 20% of the energy. There's a really a focus on increased weather barrier and air tightness. This building had a full blower door test. We have some pictures of that in a little bit, and it actually passed. It uses, or it's about a third. How do I say this? 3 times tighter than like a code building. So the contractor, the team did a really great job of sealing this building, and that was proven in the blower door test. We have a dedicated outside air system, so it provides fresh filtered air to the inhabitants. And then we have a high efficiency, it's called a VRF system that provides heating and cooling. As we mentioned, there's no fossil fuels on the project except in an emergency generator situation. So it's all electric, which is a great move in the right direction, just trying to get rid of that fossil fuel dependence. We have a very high efficient heating water system for domestic hot water. So we have heat pumps on the roof that charge some tanks, and that provides efficient system for all the showers and lavatories and things like that. All LED lighting throughout, and as well as Andrea pointed out, these great solar tubes and daylighting that helps reduce the need for artificial lights. This next really exciting bar graph shows the kind of the energy modeling process. We went through Energy Trust of Oregon Path to Net Zero program, and we accomplished that goal with the PV, which is pretty awesome. So this just shows some of the different metrics we're comparing to. You have your baseline, which is a historic building database, and then an EOI is just a measure of the energy intensity. So that 83 is what we're trying to compare to and save from to meet the Path to Net Zero requirements. Then we have our energy baseline for the state of Oregon, and that's the 38 number. Our proposed building reduced that over in half to 16. And then with PV, we're able to get down to the EOI of 9. So overall, some of the metrics on the side, 84% carbon reduction as far as the 2030 challenge, which is AIA metrics, an estimated 70,000 kilowatt hours savings a year. Just some really great achievements there. And then was able to obtain over $30,000 in ETO, Path to Net Zero incentive money. So all of those measures really add up. Not to walk through all these, but this is kind of how we got to the 9 with all of our energy efficient measures, as we talked about in the previous slide. So kind of a fun march down there. This kind of summary of pictures highlights some of the efficiency measures. That upper left one is the air barrier, air door test, blower door test, where they seal the building up, and like I said, it was 3 times better than code. The PV panels are being installed in that middle upper picture. The upper right picture is the array of heat pumps that serve the domestic hot water system. There I am, fascinated by the skylight and the tree pointing up. That little blue doghouse looking thing is the heat recovery ventilator, and that provides all of the filtered fresh air through the building. We have 2 of those that are constantly running to try to keep that space, well circulated and filtered. And then that next picture are the big storage tanks for the heat pump system. So we pump all of the hot water into there, and then that pumps out through the building for the showers and lavatories. And then last is just a picture of the VRV heat pump on the roof that serves the heating and cooling. I don't have to get into this slide much, but this just shows the HVAC system has separate ventilation air, the DOAS system, and then the VRF does the heating and cooling. And so by separating these two out, you're able to get some efficiencies by just ventilating the building and then just worrying about the heating and cooling with the other systems. So you don't have to run all of them together in theory. And you're able to share energy between zones with the VRF system. So there's some efficiencies there. And I think that's it. Yeah. We had a video.
Don't bring up the video.
Yeah, I know.
Don't bring up the video.
We didn't get it to work.
Unless somebody has a thumb drive, we'll two back buttons.
Yes.
Questions?
So at this point, we'll open this up to questions. If anyone has anything to ask about or specific questions for our panel.
Yeah, maybe Chris can be the MC there.
My question is about how would someone who identifies as non-binary navigate through this space?
Yes, so we have specific zones. There's a male identifying zone, a female identifying zone, and then a flex zone. And essentially, we have the ability to accommodate wherever people feel comfortable, and that's our main focus when we're doing an intake. Is we have this bed available. Do you feel comfortable? And it's not necessarily about gender. Even if they identify as female, and we have this bed available, if they feel comfortable there, that's our most important goal. So, yeah.
And I want to add too, if you can hear me, part of this also happens when Washington County does intake. Because this is part of a spectrum of shelter opportunities, for somebody that is non-binary or, they have a multitude of other options as well. So this shelter, as we said, it's not for families, it's for individuals. Most of the spaces are gendered spaces, but this is not the only opportunity somebody would have. There may be other shelter opportunities in the Washington County system that better fits that person's needs.
Hi. I just want to start off by I'm really impressed by the intentionality and just how beautiful everything looks like. I hope that your participants are enjoying it. I just have a question about services on site and how you do staffing ratios and what has been, I guess, the most successful parts of the programming since you opened up last.
The most successful. The most successful, I guess I could base off of. I also operate a different shelter, and I'm consistently having to do transfer requests. And it wasn't until the other day where I had to do a request out of Beaverton that I realized, I have not had to transfer anyone out of here. No one has wanted to leave this space. And the only reason that happened is because they had a pet that, they wanted to be in a pod location. And so I think the most success has definitely just been the retention within shelter. And the community definitely being aware that if you have somebody who has more complex needs, that this might be the place for them. Then I'll also, be equal. The most difficult part about the space has been that sleeping area with us, conforming to, meet the needs of the population. We had to implement extra security measures. We put panic buttons in each one of the rooms. We also have a security person posted in the dormitories all night, just to provide an extra layer of security, since it is individual, but just extra layer of security, yeah.
Any other questions?
I'm also very impressed with everything. Just want to say thank you guys for everything you do. I did have two questions. So my first one is, what is the name of the shelter? Is it kind of like the series? I know it's really new, but is there a specific name for it?
Beaverton Congregate Shelter.
Oh.
Yes. Yeah.
The second
So, as far as our program, our ideal is a 100-day marker, depending on the severity of barriers they're facing. But if people are engaging in the program, whether that's with case management for HLS, you know, career searching, higher education, if they're engaged in the program, then there's not really a linkage there. As long as there's engagement, you know, we've had people within our program for, you know, I hate to say it, almost 2 years that have severe barriers. So, as long as they're doing what they have to, we don't have an exit date.
If you guys can go back to the slide where it said the trauma-informed colors and design images, picture that. Thank you guys.
This one?
The
color palette. Color palette?
Cool. Also, you mentioned that somebody needed to be transferred out because of pets. Pets are allowed at the shelter, and there are accommodations for pet relief area. And we didn't talk a whole lot about the outdoor space, but there's also kind of like a water feature out there to help deaden the sound of the highway noise and to provide a little bit more of a connection with the natural element. And there's another circular big tree out there that hopefully will grow up nice and big. As Chris mentioned, you know, everybody's needs are different, and so we did try to accommodate as much as we could here to make sure that everybody felt safe, and it did have those little barriers. But I did want to clarify that pets are allowed, even though that this individual needed to transfer. Yeah.
And pets love to pee on that tree.
Great. I'm sure.
The exact tree. Yeah.
Sorry, you want to see the little, we have some slides at the end here that are just, because the video's not working, this is what the space looked like before we touched it. So that's looking at the reception area.
That's after the mattress store.
After the mattress store, when we got our hands on the building, that's what the lobby turned it into. Yeah, that's existing.
Yeah, this is original plan.
I also forgot to ask, well, first also, I've driven by this and I knew there was a shelter somewhere around here and I didn't know it was there. You know, I dropped off some donations at Goodwill and it was actually my partner who's not in this industry that said, oh, I think that's the shelter right there. I'm like, really?
Yeah.
So it definitely does not feel like that from the outside looking in, and I just thought it was a really nice space. So I was really impressed by it. I'm also wondering about storage. How does that work for your participants? Is it in all of their bed pods? So
Yes.
they're able to lock in these two?
Yeah. So they definitely have that locking cabinet, and then we do have property limits, but they have. You would be surprised how how they've gotten creative with the space, whether it be the under the bed storage and things like that. But there is property limits just to limit the damage to the space or anything like that. Yeah, but.
And then
Yeah,
there's
this is-
storage containers that are outside
Yeah.
the outdoor area that provide additional storage for the building, because the building footprint just simply, the amount of storage that shelter needs is significant, and so we couldn't accommodate that in all the program needs, so there are some additional storage containers outside, as well as every space that we could stitch in a closet in between spaces or in awkward closet shapes. There's a closet there, so hopefully there's storage off of each of the adjacent spaces to support them. There's one off of the laundry, one off of the kitchen. There's one off of the vanity area up. That's what they say that there's enough, because there's no
Thanks everybody for joining us this morning. Glad everybody got in and found parking. We have a few cards up here if anyone would like one. Has some contact info for our team if there's any further questions. We're happy. This team is excited to have multiple points of being able to present this information out to everyone who wants to hear about it. So if there are other opportunities that you would like other folks to hear about the shelter, just let us know. Thanks.